Welcome to the first episode of Criminal Companies. I'm Ed Minnock, and today I'm going to talk about a company called MiniScribe that I once worked for. MiniScribe was a disk drive manufacturing company headquartered in Longmont, Colorado. And MiniScribe was caught in a massive fraud when it actually shipped bricks. Now, this may sound like the dumbest company in history, but I'm going to explain what MiniScribe did, why they did it, and how they got caught. I'm also going to share some of the mistakes that I made while I was at MiniScribe. Well, let's get started. In 1985, MiniScribe was facing bankruptcy, and a venture capitalist firm named Hamburg & Quist injected $20 million. The $20 million bought 6.7 million shares of MiniScribe stock at $3 per share. A partner at Hamburg & Quist named QT Wiles became CEO and chairman. And as part of the 20 million, QT Wiles invested 1.6 million of his own money and bought over 500,000 shares of MiniScribe stock. QT Wiles is known as Dr. Fix-It. He was credited with turning around several companies. And in interviews, he would say that the secret to his success was his ability to break a company down into its smallest components, see the details, and make emotion-free decisions. So QT Wiles reorganized MiniScribe into 5 divisions. And he told his division general managers, if they meet their financial goals, they will receive bonuses of up to 100% of their salary. But if they miss their financial goals, they're going to lose their jobs. They might be reassigned or they might be terminated from the company. In 1987, just 2 years later, MiniScribe is very profitable and the stock reached $18 per share. The $20 million investment was now worth $120 million. QT Wiles' $1.6 million investment was worth roughly $10 million, and business journalists said, Dr. Fix-It does it again. But 1987 was also the year MiniScribe lost control of its inventory. In January, auditors discovered a $2 million inventory discrepancy. A division manager and a finance manager actually broke into the trunk of the auditor's car and changed the numbers. In September, a physical inventory revealed that actual inventory was $15 million less than recorded inventory. Now, accounting rules state that what MiniScribe should do is, on the balance sheet, the inventory levels should be reduced by $15 million. And on the income statement, MiniScribe should take a one-time charge inventory write-off for $15 million, which would reduce income before interest and taxes by $15 million. But for a company the size of MiniScribe, taking a $15 million write-off would ruin the financials for both the quarter and the year. The stock is going to drop, perhaps by a lot, and QT Wiles and the other investors are going to lose money. Further, MiniScribe's board of directors might lose confidence in him and replace him. He was 70 years old. Well, Dr. Fix-It was not about to let that happen. So a tense meeting was held between QT Wiles and his senior managers. The senior managers thought the meeting was to talk about taking the write-off, but QT Wiles said, we will not be taking the write-off, and instead he ordered his managers to gross up the inventory, meaning fill the hole. Now the fraud triangle explains how this works. The fraud triangle has 3 elements: pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. In a business, there's pressure to achieve goals. It might be get a project done on time, close a sale, or earn a profit. And business pressure is applied in 2 ways. If we meet our goals, we get to keep our jobs. We might get promoted. We might get bonuses. But if we miss our goals, we can lose our job and our chance at advancement. Opportunity is a set of illegal actions that can potentially achieve the goals, and rationalization is each person's moral gatekeeper that either justifies illegal activity or stops it. Now, everybody's different, and unfortunately, some people can easily justify illegal activity. Fortunately, most of us can't. But pressure is really important because the more pressure is applied, the greater the chance there is that somebody's going to cheat. And QT Wiles was under a lot of pressure to report profit and increase the stock price. And he had big rewards. He stood to make a lot of money. And as the CEO and chairman of the board, he had a lot of power. And he had his reputation as Dr. Fix-It. And he didn't want to lose all that. So QT Wiles saw fraud as an opportunity to achieve the financial goals and keep his CEO job and compensation. And somehow QT Wiles justified committing the fraud But once he made his decision, his managers justified going along with him. So MiniScribe developed a fraud plan. They rented an empty warehouse in Boulder. They bought 26,000 bricks from the Colorado Brick Company. They bought 10 48-foot trailers. They wrote a computer program called Cookbook to generate serial numbers for the brick inventory. Now, in today's world, it's hard to imagine what MiniScribe was thinking, to have bricks masquerade as disk drives. Because here's a modern disk drive. It came out of a laptop I bought a few years ago. And as you can see, it's really small and it weighs 3 to 4 ounces. And here's a brick. It's much bigger and it weighs 4 pounds. But back in the 1980s, disk drives were much bigger. Here's a 1988 MiniScribe disk drive. As you can see, it's slightly larger than the brick and it weighs more. It weighs about 5 pounds. So you can see that in the 1980s, bricks were much closer to the same size as disk drives. So on December 18th, 1987, MiniScribe loaded bricks onto pallets. And although I never saw a brick pallet, my guess is that they wrapped them in cardboard that had MiniScribe's name on it. Then they put stretch wrap around it so that a pallet of disk drives would look roughly the same as the pallet of bricks. Then they loaded the brick pallets onto trailers and they counted it as finished goods inventory. So the hole was filled. But MiniScribe had another problem in December 1987. Some of the divisions were on track to miss their financial goals, and the division managers knew if they missed their financial goals, they're going to lose their jobs. So they committed more fraud. Disk drives were shipped to off-site warehouses and booked as revenue, and that's illegal. They even made imaginary shipments of brick pallets and counted that as revenue. And after the books were closed, they reversed these ghost sales and moved the bricks back into inventory. Now, they didn't physically move the bricks, just on the books, but they got away with all of it. And the following month, in January of 1988, MiniScribe reported its annual results for 1987, and they were amazing. Revenue was $362 million, a 96% increase over 1986. Income before interest and taxes, $36 million, a 49% increase over 1986. But if you were to subtract out all the fraud between the bricks and the other fraud, the actual income before interest and taxes was probably half the 36 million. But MiniScribe reported these great results when the entire disk drive industry was experiencing a downturn. And Wall Street was impressed, which kept MiniScribe's stock a whole lot higher than it should have been. A month later, I joined MiniScribe in February of 1988. And based upon everything I had heard and read, I thought I was joining a great company with a superstar CEO. I was so confident that I went out and I bought a sports car and took on monthly car payments, even though I didn't have any money saved. Okay, so that was my first mistake. The first couple of months, I worked in the clean room, and then I was asked to help suppliers improve quality. Well, I immediately learned that the biggest problem suppliers had was MiniScribe wasn't paying them. So I asked the purchasing manager, what's going on? He told me it was a temporary problem, and it was caused by MiniScribe's rapid growth because growth consumes cash. My second mistake was believing him. So instead of looking for a new job, I continued to try to do my job, but it didn't get better. It got worse. And before long, suppliers were extremely difficult to deal with. And I didn't blame them. In fact, I could relate because MiniScribe wasn't reimbursing my travel expenses. But meanwhile, MiniScribe's financial reports continued to impress. So here's the third quarter results from 1988. Best quarter ever, 15 million in net income, and QT Wiles said, we have achieved the best results in our company's history and now have a 3-year track record of consecutive growth in revenues and increasing profitability. Now in reality, MiniScribe lost 2.2 million in that quarter, which shows one of the problems with cheating, is that once it starts, it's hard to stop because there's continuous pressure to report better and better financial results. But despite the great financial reports, I decided it was time to find another job. I really disliked my job of trying to convince suppliers to make quality components for MiniScribe when MiniScribe wasn't paying him. So I updated my resume and I planned to contact a few companies. But when I returned to work on Monday, my boss asked me to spend the rest of the year in South Korea. South Korea is where MiniScribe's only head actuator supplier was located. And the head actuator is the most critical component in a disk drive. MiniScribe used to have 2 head actuator suppliers, but the second one stopped shipping to MiniScribe because MiniScribe didn't pay it. So I asked my boss what my other options were. He shook his head. 2 days later, I was on a plane to South Korea. And despite the fact that MiniScribe owed the supplier a lot of money, the supplier worked really hard and built high-quality head actuators for MiniScribe. But as the weeks passed in South Korea, I started to regret buying that sports car because the monthly payments were draining my checking account and I never got to drive it. Well, then in December, my weekly check-in phone call to Longmont went unanswered. And the following week, a stranger answered and told me the people I used to work with had been laid off. And when I returned to Longmont after the first of the year, the place was awash in nasty rumors. A clean room technician told me that production was ordered to pack scrap materials as finished goods. I didn't believe him. I'm thinking no company does that. And then my boss tells me he wants me back in South Korea immediately. Well, now I'm starting to get worried. MiniScribe already owed me over $5,000 in unreimbursed travel expenses. And I'm thinking, what if I get back to South Korea and MiniScribe enters bankruptcy? I get laid off, I got to buy my own plane ticket back, and I never get reimbursed. I'm starting to envision a scenario where I could be both unemployed and broke. So the Friday before I was scheduled to leave, I called the accounting department and I asked if I could have an expense reimbursement check. I was told I would receive a call when it was ready. Well, 4 o'clock rolled around and I had heard nothing, so I drove over to the accounting building and I asked the woman if I could have my check. She said it couldn't be done that day. And I told her, look, I'm scheduled to go back to South Korea. Again, she said it can't be done that day. So I thought I was making a reasonable request because I'm not a bank making a 0% interest loan to MiniScribe. So I politely told her that if I don't get a check, I'm not getting on a plane. Well, she walked into the office of the chief financial officer. She returned with a check. I thanked her and I drove back to my building. Well, when I got back to my office, my boss was waiting for me. He said the chief financial officer called and demanded that I be fired. Well, I didn't get fired, but my boss told me I was way out of line, insisting upon a check. But what my boss didn't know was I'd been calling companies all week, and I had an interview set up Saturday in Boulder at a startup company. And my goal for the interview was get an offer. And I tried everything. I even told them I like working weekends and evenings, but it didn't work. And at the end of the interview, they told me they'd make a decision by the middle of the following week. So I went back to South Korea, but on Thursday morning, before I went into the head actuator factory, I called the Boulder startup where it was Wednesday afternoon. Great news, I had an offer. So I booked a flight home. Monday morning, I walked into my boss's office with a resignation in hand. And his first words were, what are you doing here? But he figured it out. So I left MiniScribe in January of 1989, and I still had no idea the company was involved in a massive fraud. So now, let me tell you how MiniScribe got caught. In December, while I was in South Korea, in the fog of the layoffs and the fraud, pallets of bricks were shipped to a customer by mistake. Apparently, MiniScribe did too good of a job making the brick pallets look like disk drives. And when the mistake was realized, it was too late to recall the trucks. When the bricks arrived in January, the customer called the Department of Justice. MiniScribe entered a death spiral. QT Wiles resigned for what he said were personal reasons, and after a few weeks on the job, the new CEO announced that all the financial reports from the 3 years QT Wiles was CEO were inaccurate. So Dr. Fix-It was actually Mr. Fake-It. And a few months later, QT Wiles and 15 other executives were charged with fraud, including the chief financial officer who wanted me fired. And QT Wiles was found guilty of both fraud and insider trading and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He entered prison at age 75. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs, several suppliers were harmed, and at least one entered bankruptcy, and stockholders lost everything. And as for Dr. Fix-It, it appears there really wasn't a Dr. Fix-It, because QT Wiles was a con artist who created a criminal company that cheated every quarter. And the magnitude of the fraud begs the question, Was MiniScribe the first time QT Wiles committed fraud, or was it just the first time he was caught? When I joined MiniScribe, I was pretty naive. I was a frontline worker doing what I was told, and I paid too much attention to what management was saying in the great financial reports and too little attention to the actual evidence, because I never put two and two together and suspected the company could be committing fraud. And there was another thing I didn't know at the time, is that everyone who knew MiniScribe was committing fraud was complicit in the fraud and can be found guilty. And there have been companies that when they get caught, the company protects the management and the frontline people end up going to prison. So it's important to protect yourself. And here are the steps. First, build a cash reserve of at least 3 months and ideally 6 months. Don't do what I did, which is take on debt before you have any money saved. Second, build a professional network, including potential hiring managers. And third, practice critical thinking, which is collecting facts and making unbiased judgments. Check out rumors of illegal behavior, because sometimes the most outrageous rumors are actually true. And be suspicious when what management says doesn't match reality. And finally, don't wait for things to go bad, and don't wait to be asked to do something you really don't want to do, because you can find yourself in a foreign country 6,000 miles away from home while your company is entering a death spiral. So pursue offers. And even if you have an okay job or a good job, there are great jobs out there with great bosses and great people to work with. And it's worth it to get one of those jobs. Well, thanks for watching. Oh, and that guy behind me, that's my grandpa.